Monsieur Stephane Dion.
Merci beaucoup. I'm pleased to see that despite Enbridge very strange mapping, the beautiful island of Vancouver still exists. On dit qu'il n'y a pas de traduction simultanée, donc à tous les francophones, et je sais qu'il y en a beaucoup parce que beaucoup sont venus me parler tout à l'heure. Je m'excuse, je vais livrer le discours en anglais, mais je vous assure, une version française du discours existe. Madame Wells l'a peut-être déjà reçue. Elle sera disponible pour tout le monde, ainsi que la version anglaise. Et s'il y a du temps pour les questions à la fin, ça me fera plaisir de répondre en français aux questions qui me seront posées en français. Alors, je suis ici pour le Canada. I'm here for Canada. I stand here before Canadians whose political affiliation is different from mine, although we do agree on some points, but who care deeply about Canada. The speech I'm about to deliver here today is the same speech I would give, word for word, whether I were speaking before the Conservative Party, the New Democratic Party, or before my dear Liberal friends. But it is the Green Party that has invited me, and I am thanking you for being so open-minded. Although knowing Elizabeth May, as I do, this comes as no surprise. In a democratic country, there are some issues that require parties to cooperate despite their political rivalries. Such issues include the fundamental rules that are the very expression of democracy. And this includes our voting system. Ideally, all political parties should agree on the voting system. And to achieve this, the parties need to talk to one another. A voting system is more than just a way of tallying votes. It sets the ground rules that, for better or for worse, have a profound influence on voters' choices. The behaviors of politicians and political parties, parliamentary proceedings, and government operations are affected by the voting system. Since my quest is for a voting system that best suits the interest of the entire Canada, I do not wish to focus on the individual interests of any given party, whether it is a small party that wants to grow, or a formerly large party that wants to return to its former strength. Federally, Canada had the same voting system since Confederation. So why change anything when Canada works relatively well overall? Why change our political traditions and adopt a new voting system which would inevitably be more complex than the one we already have? Indeed, it is hard to beat the first-past-the-post voting system in terms of simplicity. In response, I would argue that our voting system is weakening Canada's cohesion. That is why I want to change it. It is not the only reason, but it is the main one. Indeed, our voting system weakens Canada's cohesion because it artificially amplifies the regional concentration of political party support at the federal level. It makes our major parties appear less national and our regions more politically opposed than they really are. With 50% of the vote in a given province, a federal party could end up taking almost all the seats. But with 20% of the vote, it may end up not winning any seats at all. This is how Ontario appeared more liberal than it really was, Alberta more reform or conservative, and Quebec more bloc, and so on and so on. This regional amplification effect benefits parties with regionally concentrated support and conversely penalizes parties whose support is spread across the country without dominating anywhere. A party able to reach out to voters across the country is at disadvantage compared to another whose base is only in one region. For years, these dynamics worked against the Progressive Conservative Party and the NDP and favored the Reform Party and the Bloc. The next federal election, expected in October 2015, will be held under our current first-past-the-post voting system. This means that once again, election night, when you look at on TV the result, we are likely to wonder which region of our country will be virtually shut out of the executive branch. Will it be the West, or perhaps Quebec? In 1979, it was Quebec. In 1980, it was the West. Between 1993 and 2005, the Liberals were fortunate to have Ralph Goodale and Anne McClellan if they had not won their seats, often by a very thin margin. Saskatchewan and Alberta would not have been represented by strong ministers for a period of 13 years. And today, the federal cabinet includes 4 of the 5 Conservative MPs elected in Quebec, which hardly ensures that these ministers will be outstanding. So, I have no problem with regional political differences, to the contrary. But what I do have a problem with is the harmful political amplification that is artificially created by the current voting system. For example, as long as Quebecers who wish for secession and independence are numerous enough to elect MPs, they must be fairly represented in the House of Commons. But it does nobody any good if they are overrepresented in the House of Commons. During all the years that the Bloc dominated Quebec's representation in the House of Commons, they never received a majority of votes in Quebec. I remember when I started my political career and I was coming in Victoria, let's say, when I was saying that I was an MP from Quebec, people assumed that I was a Bloc MP. But most people were not voting Bloc in Quebec. My main concern with all this is national cohesion, not to say national unity. I do not see why we should keep a voting system that artificially exaggerates our political divisions and leads to regional marginalization within the government. This is the main reason why I recommend replacing our voting system. The challenge now is to come up with an alternative. It would be unrealistic to think that we will agree on the solution by 2015. What I do think is achievable is for parties, the Greens, the Liberals, the NDP, and even the Conservatives, should they be so inclined, to have in their electoral platform a commitment to conduct meaningful studies and consultations on voting system reform, perhaps via a royal commission. This commitment must be as assertive and official as possible in order to avoid the usual pattern whereby parties are open to voting system reform when in the opposition, but much less so once they have seized power under the current rules. I think it's a bit the situation we have provincially in British Columbia, if you understand well. So in the meantime, we should not be afraid to continue the debate and investigate what kind of alternative system we could propose to Canadians in lieu of the current system. In my opinion, the solution is not pure and full proportional representation. And let me explain that. That voting system, pure proportional representation, promotes a proliferation of political parties and does not encourage them to aggregate preferences and interests, including regional interest. Pure proportional representation is not recommended, especially in a country with strong regional identities. We do not want to create a situation here in Canada like the one in Belgium, where parties no longer even bother trying to elect officials across the country. In Belgian federal elections, all parties, including the Greens, try to get elected in a single region, where they anchor their positions, only then to face tremendous difficulty trying to forge together a stable, cohesive national government for the country. Similarly, here in Canada, pure proportional representation could lead to the advent of provincialist parties elected to defend only their province's supposed interest. We therefore need to temper proportional representation in order to prevent the proliferation of political parties and to encourage parties to aggregate the regional interest of such a diverse country as Canada. And to achieve this, we need rules that apply to all across Canada during federal elections. We must not establish rules that vary from province to province, since this might encourage Canadians to look upon the federal election as an addition of provincial elections. In my opinion, this is the main disadvantage of the proposal that was made in 2004 by the Law Commission of Canada. The Commission proposed achieving proportional representation by electing a third of MPs from compensatory lists created at the provincial level or at regional level for the biggest provinces, Quebec and Ontario. Thus, the House of Commons would be made up of MPs elected in ridings, like today, as well as provincial and regional MPs elected from lists. The number of candidates per party included of these lists would vary immensely from just one in Prince Edward Island to about a dozen for some regions in Quebec and Ontario. This would effectively divide Canada up into several political microclimates, to use a word that the room today will understand. I would find that worrisome. Instead, I propose a moderate form of proportional representation, one that does not create different categories of MPs or huge regional differences in terms of rules. And we can achieve that. We can achieve this by increasing the size of our federal ridings. We would elect, this is my proposition, we would elect 5 MPs by riding, or perhaps 4 or 3 when a low population density warrants it. Let's say the territories, leave them alone, they will have 1 MP. Each of them are big like Europe, so you cannot make them bigger, so they will stay single MP district. But the standard would be 5-member districts. The number of seats would remain the same. We have enough MPs, 238, thanks to the ill-advised reform of Mr. Harper. We don't need more MPs. But what would be... But what would be reduced is the number of ridings. This would give Canada a type of proportional representation that would reduce the artificially amplified regional concentration of seats won by the various parties. Indeed, any party obtaining the most votes in a given riding would be unlikely to win more than 3 out of 5 seats. Thus, seats would be truly up for grabs in all ridings, even in the most conservative ones in Alberta or British Columbia. And the most liberal ones, I guess we still have, in Toronto and Montreal. True, larger ridings would comprise several communities and not only one. And many people will complain about that because the ridings will be 5 times larger. But it is also true that with the current system, not every community has its own riding. In fact, all too often, the boundaries of our small ridings split our communities into 2 or 3 parts. Every time the electoral map is revised, I have to fight to make sure this does not happen in Saint-Laurent or Cartierville, the 2 communities that form my riding. With larger districts, it would be easier to guarantee that each community remains intact within the same riding. True, this means 5 members district system. This means that individual MPs would no longer hold a monopoly position in their ridings. They would have to coexist with the 4 other MPs in the riding. But you know what? This can only benefit their constituents. Today, voters have no recourse when they are stuck for 4 years with a lazy, incompetent, or absentee MP. It may happen. Under the new system, constituents would be able to deal with a different elected official. Healthy competition among the 5 MPs in a given riding would provide Canadians with better territorial representation. A House of Commons elected this way would likely be more representative of women and cultural diversity, as the parties would have an incentive to diversify their offering of candidates in each riding. If you have 5 candidates in a riding, you will have an electoral interest to diversify their profile, to be sure that all the voters will be identified with your party. Also true, the proportional representation resulting from 5-member ridings would be less likely to elect one-party majority governments, and many will see that as a problem. We would probably have coalition governments made up of 2 or 3 nationwide parties. Such system, 5 members district system, already exist in other countries and represent what some political scientists call the electoral sweet spot, a balance between the representation in Parliament of various political movements, the party's ability to aggregate interests, and the opportunity to maintain stable, responsible governments. Electoral reform could very well stop there. 5-member ridings would represent a vast improvement for Canada, its cohesion, and its democracy. However, at the risk of being accused of complicating things, I am also proposing adding preferential voting to our electoral system. This would encourage our parties to cooperate and form effective, cohesive coalition governments when needed. As you know, under preferential voting, voters are asked, when casting their votes, to rank the parties in order of preferences. So green, in your case, and then you choose. And you may stop at green if all the parties are wrong in your mind. But if you have a preference between NDP, Liberal, Conservative, you rank. The great advantage of preferential voting is that it promotes cooperation among the parties, because it is actually in each party's interest to persuade those who support other parties that it represents a second acceptable choice. Choose me. I understand your first choice will be green, but I'm quite green too. I'm an acceptable second choice. What do you think? The parties are thus encouraged to highlight not only wedge issues and attacks, personal attacks. They are encouraged to highlight similarities as well in their objectives and platforms, as well as mutual respect among party leaders. After an election, MPs would know to which combination of partisan votes they owe their victory. On this island, Elizabeth would know that he had the support of the Greens, but the second choice of some parties will have go to her and she will know it. HMPs in Canada will know it. The makeup of coalition then would be influenced by the expression of voters' preferences. It will be more democratic. And as a result, the coalitions are more likely to be coherent. Accordingly, preferential voting would mean a healthy improvement for our national cohesion and more broadly for our political culture. So the trade-off is, yes, it will be more complicated, but it's much better for the country. If we put my proposals together, we get an overall picture of what I call the proportional preferential personalized vote, P3, P3. A Quebec think tank on federalism, l'idée fédérale, the federal idea, published my proposal in April 2012, and it's why Elizabeth invited me here today. Thank you. I take sole responsibility for the views expressed in that paper, although it was published with the consent of Liberal leader Bob Rae. Concretely, this is how the P3 voting system would work. So, remember, the typical riding has 5 seats. You go at the ballot box. First thing that you do is you rank parties according to your preferences. So as I said, green for you. And after you choose, if you want to rank the other parties. Once you have done that, you look at your first preference, in your case it's green. You have 5 green candidates. You pick one of them. You choose one of them. And after, that's it. You leave and you go home. It's not more complicated than that. So now, how the ballots would be counted. First, the voters' first party preferences would be counted. If one or more parties in the riding have not enough first preferences to get one of the 5 seats, you eliminate the weakest one of them, the one that received the less votes. And then we consider the second preferences of the voters of this party. And you repeat this exercise until all the parties that are still in the running have at least 1 seat. And it gives you the number of seats by party in the riding. Once it's done, you allocate these seats to the candidates that receive the more votes. So let's say that on this island, the Greens received 2 seats. So who of the 5 candidates of the Green Party will receive these 2 seats? The one that received the more votes. And that's it. It's not more complicated than that. This is the way P3 would work. Granted, it is more complex than the current system. But I would argue that P3 is not more complicated than most electoral systems used around the world, and that Canadians are as intelligent as other human beings. Under P3, coalition governments, when we will need them, would likely be stable governments formed by 2 or 3 national parties that would have prepared themselves to govern together in trying to convince the voters of the other parties that they are an acceptable second choice. And they would be ready and able to govern together with support spread across the country. No region would be likely to be out of the executive anymore. Parliament would be made up of MPs who would all have a home territory and would have been chosen personally, not through lists. Because candidates of the same party would compete for seats, party cohesion could be affected. You would have 5 green people competing each other in each riding. But with this new kind of competition, candidates of the same party would still have to act as team players. If all the Greens are attacking themselves, nobody will vote for them. So they would have to show cohesion for their own party to be able to rely the votes needed to obtain seats. Those parties best able to combine cohesion and internal competition would have the best chance of winning to the benefit of Canadians. So the challenge will be the same for all the parties. Internal competition and cohesion to convince people to vote for us. Wilfred Day of the organization Fair Vote did a simulation of a P3 vote using the results of 2011 election. He noted that this voting system that I have proposed would have improved the proportionality of the results, but to a lesser extent than what would have resulted from pure proportional representation. And he regrets this. But this is precisely the point of P3, to enhance the expression of opinions and reduce regional distortions without encouraging the multiplication of parties. My aim is to have one Green Party, not 10 Green parties. As Mr. Day acknowledged, the kind of simulation he does not take into account the changes in political behavior that P3 would promote. For example, under P3, voters would be able to vote for their true preferences instead of juggling random strategic calculations. They would no longer have to wonder whether they should abandon voting for Party A and instead vote for Party B in order to block Party C. They would simply rank these parties according to their preferences. I am willing to bet that this would have garnered more votes for the Green Party and the Liberal Party in 2011 and for the NDP in the past. Furthermore, with P3, prominent candidates, the ones who draw votes, can run in larger ridings. People like Elizabeth May in Vancouver Island and Ralph Goodale in Regina would have probably garnered more votes for the Greens and the Liberals. Lastly, it is almost certain that voter turnout would have been higher than with the current voting system. Indeed, with P3, Kenyans would be more motivated to get out and vote because in 5-seat ridings, where seats are at stake in every riding across the country, and with preferential voting, voters would be in a better position to influence the final results, either through their first choices or through their second and subsequent choices. To conclude, with P3, we would get a voting system that enhances the presence of our political parties Canada-wide, reinforces the degree of cooperation that should exist between parties, makes every vote count and ensures that seats are truly at play across Canada. P3 voting would be a customized voting system for Canada, a set of ground rules that fit the characteristics and needs for cohesion of our vast, decentralized, pluralistic, and diverse country. My formula may not be the best solution, and I keep an open mind. I am ready to discuss this issue with Canadians of all political color, green, red, orange, and blue, and with anyone who is looking for ways to make Canada a more democratic and more unified country. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Merci tout le monde. Thank you, everyone. Monsieur Dion is willing to take some questions. I see that Eric is, people are lining up at those mics in the middle of a standing ovation. I think we all note something historic here. And Stephane made note of it, and I want to acknowledge it publicly. It is all too rare for leaders of federal political party to express mutual respect. It shouldn't be so rare. But Stephane and I have made history, and I am never going to be anything but enormously grateful to him and proud of the fact that we did make history. And I'm going to go to the first microphone and ask Adriana Magnato-Hamu to state her question.
Hi, my name is Adriana Magnato-Hamu. I am the climate change critic for the Green Party, and you and I have corresponded by email. I want to thank you for stealing our carbon tax policy in 2008. And the reason why I stood up is because I'd like for us to steal your climate change policy. I know that you've spoken about an international policy that you've promoted in UN negotiations. It's something that I've thought of before, and I thought it didn't have a chance coming from some party that didn't even have representation in their own country. But you have so much respect internationally on the climate change scene because of your really good work in that field. I know that was received very warmly, and I'd like for our party to hear that, possibly absorb it and expand it. And you might find that if you get a more receptive audience with the Green Party, you might want to switch sides. Thanks.
I just want to say that if we want carbon pricing in the country, the people that are supporting carbon pricing should stop to attack each other. I think...
Absolutely. Could you just introduce very briefly what your international ideas, because you're a brilliant political strategist, and that's really important.
Well, if I was brilliant, I would have a different country today. Thank you very much anyway. Yes, I don't want to extend too much on this topic, but I strongly think that the world needs a world carbon pricing. Of course, some countries cannot afford the same price than others, but then we need to have an equalization payment system à la Canadienne to address this. But as long as we don't have significant carbon pricing, I'm afraid that we'll not, as politicians, deliver what the scientists are asking us to deliver to reconcile our standard of living with the planet.
Going over to Eric, second mic.
Yes, I want to thank you for putting so much effort into crafting an alternative electoral system proposal and putting political capital into presenting it around the country in many different fora. I want to ask you, going back into history a little bit, in 2004, the late Jack Layton was quoted in the Globe and Mail as saying a non-negotiable precondition of any coalition with the Liberals would be holding a referendum on switching to a new method of electing MPs. But in 2008, when you and Mr. Layton crafted a coalition agreement, exactly like he's saying, nowhere in that agreement was anything on electoral reform included in the final text. I was just wondering if you could enlighten us, was that brought up in the discussions and it didn't make it into the text, or had a change of opinion happen in between? Why did that earlier promise not translate when it came time to put ink to paper on a coalition agreement?
I don't remember exactly if we discussed this issue because we were so much focusing on the economic crisis that the government of the time, Mr. Flaherty, Mr. Harper, were denying to exist. It's why we needed to do something, and all our discussion were about that. But anyway, both the NDP and the Liberals and the Greens were committed to look at this issue. Madame May and I, when we agreed to not run in each riding, it was part of our agreement that if we were successful to have a government, the government then would be in obligation to do what I'm suggesting, to have a deeper review of the electoral system that we have and to try to find a consensus to have another one. So Mr. Layton and I knew that we were in agreement about that. So it may be because of that it was not in the agreement at the end of the day.
John Stryker.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Dion, pour vos mots. We spoke when we were discussing the size of Parliament on the committee, and at that time I was the President of the Green Party of Canada. Thank you for your questions then. Eric asked about the history. I'd like to think of the future. Imagine now that we're in the future and we have P3. And it's there, we're there, this is terrific. I'm wondering, how do you think we got there?
Because we engage Canadians. Some said, just do it, be elected and do it. I have some doubt about that. You see, the electoral system is the same since Confederation. It's quite a change for Canadians to elect their MPs differently. And if you do it by surprise, I don't think it would work. So we need to convince people that first we have a problem with the system of today, which is so simple to understand, but at the same time creating results that are not optimal according to the cohesion of the country. And second, once it's done, to agree on a change. And if we have P3 at the end of the day, it's because you had this consultation through a commission that came to a result that built a consensus and is likely to end up to a referendum. And then you have a new electoral system. That would be an improvement for the democracy of Canada. I'm very convinced of that.
Jerry Sear from Winnipeg. Just two questions I'm trying to clear up in my mind. How would P3 affect election financing? Can small parties finance the fielding of multiple candidates? Well,
Mr. Harper decided that we don't have financing anymore for political parties. I don't agree with that, but it's the rule we have now. I think if we have still financing, I would suggest that parties will receive money according to their first preferences. That would help a party like you, because it's very likely you would have more first preferences than the votes you have now. Many people that today don't want to vote for the Greens because they think they will lose their vote, you're not strong enough in the riding, will say, never mind, it's my first choice. And if they don't, we are not enough to have a seat, at least I will have made my preference known, and my second or third preference will be at play. So I would suggest that the way to fund parties through the vote they receive should be through the first preferences.
Winona.
Winona Elizabeth Cook. I'm from Salt Spring Island. Thank you for coming out and honoring us with your words. I just want to make sure I'm clear on one thing, because in our election, we had 4 very good candidates. Well, we had 3 very good candidates, and we had an incumbent who is popular. But anyways,
my race.
What I'm trying to make sense of, and I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying in the way the P3 would work, is that we have, like, Elizabeth will explain her riding to you, but we've got very many diverse sites of population that are hard to get to. So when the candidates actually come, it's a really, like, a big event. With 4 candidates, we had trouble getting through the all candidates meeting and allowing people to talk and questions to be asked. And I'm wondering, I'm sitting here thinking, how would we ever do 20 candidates? And that's my question, is each party putting forth 5 people so that we would actually be looking at an election platform of 20 people?
Why 20? It's a 5-member district.
5, but that's my question to you.
Let's say on the island of Vancouver, I understand next time they will have 7 seats at play. So why not to have 2 ridings instead of 7? One of 4, the other of 3. And then you have proportional representation on the island that we don't have today.
Okay, so maybe I misunderstood you, because I understood each party would put forth
each
5
party,
candidates.
Yes. Yes.
For each riding.
I want 5 liberals running.
For each riding, though.
Yeah.
So that's...
But you have less ridings than today, so it's not more candidates at the end of the day.
Oh.
You have still 338 seats.
Yeah, no, I understand the seat business. I'm just worried about how we're going to have 20 speakers, because as I said, we had 4 parties, so if they're each running 5, in our district, it just seems a little cumbersome to me, and I'm not sure
The district is 5 times bigger, though. The district is 5 times bigger. You need people to cover the district.
I understand. So, okay, I think we're getting to the answer. I think you've got a good point. So,
actually, I was in one of these all-candidate meetings where there were 4 candidates from each party representing, and the way that was handled is that for each question, the parties each selected 1 candidate to speak on that issue. So it's kind of like everybody took their turns. It was a big stage. There were 16 people that were speaking, but only 1 party spoke at a time.
Or you may have different debates in different areas of the riding. And the best champion of the area will be the representative of the party. It's really for each party to decide the way they want to campaign. The system itself will not decide that. It will be your strategy, which one of the 5 who want to be prominent during this debate or that debate.
Okay,
Just to let you know, we're only going to be taking 2 more questions, so people standing at the mic who aren't in the front of the line will have to go now, just to break it to you gently. And take a question here. And I think that wasn't your question?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll go here and we'll go back to you. Sorry, Don. It looks like... Okay, 2 more questions from Monsieur Dion.
All right, my name is Matthew. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
You're from Antigonish.
Antigonish. I'm actually, from Antigonish. It's a small town. Thank you. I guess it's sort of touching on what John Stryker had said about, what do we do now? There's it seems like there's a bit of a discussion going on at the moment between the podium and some of the speakers. And I really believe that the process of collaboration up to 2015, collaboration, cooperation, and communication will provide an opportunity to show that we can cooperate outside of a different system. And it will really kind of give an opportunity to have this dialogue. And what do you see, Mr. Dion, as being an effective way to communicate this on the grassroots and to sort of build these coalitions outside of your proposed and very brilliantly sort of designed P3 system?
The question is what we should do after this meeting?
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to discuss the issue, and the Green Party should commit, I think it's already done, that in your platform it will be very clear that we are willing to investigate other electoral system than the one we have. And I have some job to do with the Liberal Party about that. And once the commitments are made, hopefully by all the parties that we have in the House of Commons, in the meantime, we should continue to have this dialogue. So I know that I'm invited in different places in Canada to discuss my proposal. If some of you want to invite me again, I will come. I think we should be able to... We should be able to make progress between today and 2015, not only between people active in political parties, but with Canadians at large.
Yeah.
Et le faire en anglais et en français.
Dernière question.
Kevin Smith from Pickering, Scarborough East. I want to thank you for putting this forward. I think this is a very positive proposal, and I want to make sure that my question is kind of kept as positive as possible. I did see one concern, and I'm wondering if you can clarify, I guess, how part of this works. My understanding is if you had a larger riding with 5 MPs who could be elected, the way that I see that working is that each MP would need at least 20% of the vote. For a party like the Green Party, where our support is somewhere between 5 and 10%, how many seats would we actually get under a P3 system?
Yeah. Well, of course, it will not be as proportional as pure proportional representation. At the same time, it will help the Green Party to remain one Green Party for the whole of Canada, which pure proportional representation would not give you this same possibility. I mentioned the example of Belgium. You have Les Écologistes in Wallonie, and you have another Green Party for the Flanders. I don't want that in Canada. So yes, it's true that it will not be as easy for you to have seats if you stay at 5%. If you don't have any ambition to grow. It's true. But the challenge for you will be to grow. And it's not 20% necessarily. It's a complicated arithmetic formula, but it's more around 15%. That would be the threshold that will give you a possibility to have a seat out of 15. If you are unable to have enough 15% in 338 ridings, work harder.
I think I'm not going out on any limb here to say that there is no other member of Parliament who could possibly have engaged with us on a discourse on the regional strengths of the different Green parties within Belgium. I just want to point that out. This is not something you find vastly understood within Liberal, NDP, Conservative, or even Bloc ranks. I think we've all, and Stephane, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being brave enough to accept the invitation. It seems obvious in many ways, but You've done more than almost any other MP in the House of Commons to help keep our ice caps from melting. This is a piece of art by Rick Silas, a local artist, and I'm hoping it will remind you of how grateful we all are as Canadians to a great Canadian. Merci beaucoup.